All right. Hello and welcome to another edition of the Fitter and Faster Coaches Corner. I'm your host, as always, Mike Murray. Today, I'm thrilled to speak with one of my coaching heroes, Mark Schubert from the Mission Viejo Nadadores. Coach Schubert has demonstrated coaching success at all levels, club, college, and international, matched by few coaches in the history of the sport. At the club level, the Mission Viejo Nadadores, where he was the head coach initially from 1972 to 1985, his teams won a record 44 U.S. national team titles. He also served as the head coach of Texas Aquatics for 4 years, along with Eddie Reese. While leading USC, the Trojan women took home one NCAA title in 1997, and his Trojan athletes won 49 NCAA individual titles. At the international level, Coach Schubert has been a familiar face on the Olympic coaching scene, serving on every Olympic coaching staff since 1980, placing 38 swimmers on U.S. Olympic teams. Coach Schubert was the head women's coach in 1992 and 2004. He was the head men's coach in 2000 and the women's assistant in 96. Also an assistant for combined men's and women's teams in 80, 84, and 88. Coach Schubert, welcome to the show. How are you? You just had a open water training trip to Vegas. How was it?
Oh, it was great. Actually, it was a competition. It was the West Coast Open Water Championship that was hosted by the Sandpiper Swim Club. And we had swimmers there from all over the country. And everybody was just happy to be at a swim meet.
Oh, absolutely. And how was Coach Aiken? Is he doing well? He always gets excited for open water.
Oh, he's doing real well. His kids were awesome. You know, he really prepares them well.
How much has open water been a part of your program, Coach?
Well, you know, over the years, I've always been very fortunate to have success with open water swimmer. And that's just because, you know, we train everybody as a 400 IM or 800, 1500 freestyler, and then we go down from there. But, you know, right now I'm really enjoying training Haley Anderson. She's already on the Olympic team. And we have big goals, and she won the competition yesterday, and now she's on her way to the ISL in Hungary. So she's keeping busy.
You know, we were kind of forced outside into open water this year. We couldn't get any pools open initially. So from May till about July 1st, we were exclusively training open water. So it opened a whole new side of the sport for our kids. Of course, Mission Viejo over the last couple decades, and when Coach Rose was there, open water was a big part of what was happening there. So it's great to see that continue. Coach, one of the things that I wanted to ask you first, and it's been a common question on Coach's Corner this year, how are you and the staff at Mission approaching your team throughout the chaos that's COVID, throughout the pandemic, and what are some of the things that you're learning about your athletes and coaching your athletes during this time?
Well, I'm sure it's the same for every program. You know, wherever you're back in the water, whether it be open water or in the pool, the kids are really happy to be back. They're happy to be around each other. They're happy to be around their friends. Although, you know, when you can only swim one or two in a lane, it's not quite the same. However, it's really the lack of competition that I think has hurt everybody. And to be quite honest with the kids I'm coaching, I'm pretty surprised that it hasn't hurt them worse. We had a great summer with very, very few competitions. Most of them were inter squad in nature. Now we've had one competition in Arizona last weekend, and we have another one in Arizona next weekend. So we're putting a lot of miles on our cars just to get a swim meet because Governor Newsom won't let us swim meets in California, but whatever it takes, we're going to do it. But really the training has been exceptional. I think maybe the 6 weeks off kind of gave everybody a different perspective on why they love swimming. But the swim meets are going to help a lot.
Oh, no doubt about it. And for the athletes to get motivated for something, I think is so incredibly important. And it's great to hear that you guys are traveling and making competition a priority again. We haven't seen that for a long time. The thing that you wanted to talk about today, Coach, and that I'm so excited to jump into with you is the aspect of mental training in our programs. This era of coaching, perhaps more than any other, is inundated with ideas about mental training. What does mental training look like? And I want to ask you two questions. And the first one is, what does mental training look like at Mission Viejo right now?
Well, I think it's really kind of part of the culture where positive thinking, goal setting, writing your goals down, um, thinking about your goals, not just when you go to sleep and when you wake up, but most importantly during practice itself. And we've done that since the early 70s, and it's been very effective in all of the programs that I've been involved with. And quite frankly, it's made a huge difference in my life too. I think, not only does it help the swimmer, but it helps the coach as well.
No doubt. And so when we think about mental training and we think about Mission Viejo, I love reading about those late 70s training programs that were going on there when you had the animal lane. That seemed like a highly competitive environment. What were those athletes doing from a visualization, mental training standpoint that helped elevate their practice performances as well as their competitive performances?
Well, really, we kind of took courses by a swimming coach named Schwartz. He's still coaching today, but he was coach of a famous swimmer, Mine. And he got involved with teaching this course called Pacific Institute, and that organization is still around today. And I started taking my first course back in '73, and I know um, Don taught the course to the World Championship team in '74. That's kind of when Brian was introduced to it, and we just every year would teach that course, and then we would try to live by its principles.
And what was it like being on deck watching some of those performances in practice where you had Brian and others going after American records off of pushes inside of the main set? It had to be an exciting time to be a young coach.
Well, it really was, and Brian was a great trainer, and Jesse Visaya was a great trainer. But to be honest, the person that really set the bar for everybody was Shirley Babashoff, because if you didn't swim fast and you got in her way, she would swim over you.
So it must have been fun watching them bout it out on certain main sets. Is there any day in particular, and I'm asking you to go a long way back here, that you remember fondly where the competitive nature really took hold and those guys were racing like you hadn't seen before?
Well, all those swimmers, Shirley, Brian, Jesse, were really good IMers as well. So we did a lot of training all four strokes, and did some great IM sets. And Jesse was probably the most talented swimmer that I ever coached. It was kind of a tragedy. He tore his knee up on a swim trip that we had up in Vancouver, but he did win a world championship, broke world record, won a world championship in the 200 back. And those guys would battle it out. And Jesse was 2 years younger than Brian. And the thing that was kind of cool was, although he didn't make the team that Brian made in '76, a few weeks later when we had the nationals in Philadelphia, he swam a time that would have made the team. So he was really improving quite rapidly, and Brian obviously was his big hero.
When we talk about those 1976 Olympic Games in Montreal, and you think about how competitive the mile was, and those athletes who were vying for a medal in those 76 games, in those events, and specifically in the mile, there were a lot of egos involved in trying to achieve that goal. And ultimately, Brian came out on top. But what was it like watching that level of competitiveness? You must have seen some of them doing some things with visualization to help them get through their training and elevate to the next level. Chuck Warner's famous story where Brian used to have Radar Love playing in his head when he swam the mile, or used to visualize the old Supertramp album when he was breaking through pain barriers. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah, he actually would stay after practice, and we had some pretty long practices back in those days. We'd swim morning and 2.5 hours in the afternoon. We actually didn't even swim in our main facility in the morning during the school year so that we could swim for 2.5 hours. Then they had 15 minutes to go to class. So we swam actually at the high school, and they just went to class with hair wet. And, we had a pretty awesome meet in 76. But Brian used to stay after and go 2 or 3,000 straight on his own, visualizing. And we have this big sign up on the hill that says Mission Viejo. And he used to swim looking at that sign, visualizing the thousands of people that would be in the stands in Montreal. And, without a doubt, it helped him. His whole experience in Montreal as a 17-year-old, he was obviously pretty frightened. The biggest competition he'd ever swum in was the World Championships, where he had been second to Tim Shaw. But this was his biggest stage. And the guy that was giving him a rub down thought he was cold and kept piling these blankets on, and he kept shivering. And then all of a sudden he realized he wasn't cold, he was scared. And so he started talking to him about, what are you going to do after the Olympics? Well, I'm going to go camping with my girlfriend, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And he just kind of calmed down. Was really kind of a brilliant move on his part. And then when he got into the race, he was very tight. He was scared. I don't think there was anybody in the building that was more scared, other than perhaps me, because he was third place, the first 800. And I kept asking myself, what is he doing? But Brian started visualizing being in third place, and he saw himself on the award stand with the bronze medal around his neck, and he thought to himself, well, that's not bad. There's not too many people in the world that have a bronze medal from the Olympics. And then all of a sudden he just kind of mentally slapped himself in the face, and he goes, that's not what I've been training for. That's not what I've been practicing. That's not what I've been visualizing. And he went a time that on the last 400 of the race, that would have been a world record 4 years earlier for 400 meters. So I think without a doubt, that was the power of the mind.
And so you were doing things in the lead up to the games to help these athletes put themselves in a position inside the race to win. Were there certain strategies that you had talked about with Brian from a mental standpoint, or things to focus on to help them get there?
Well, we always kept a logbook, and Brian was really great about that. Matter of fact, I have copies of his logbook that I still refer to, practices and so forth. But we used to have some very basic things. Obviously writing your goals down, not just writing your goals down, but writing your goal splits down, practicing those goals split in workout as much as possible. He would always write down his times from practice, star his best times in practice, set goals in practice. And we also use what's known as where he would actually talk about his performances, his goals, as if they are happening currently. In other words, I swim like an Olympic champion every day in practice. I eat like an Olympic champion every day in practice. Very positive, very present tense. It's called an affirmation. And he had a whole book full of affirmations. Something like that you usually do either when you first wake up in the morning or when you go to sleep at night, and then you visualize. And he was great at visualization. He was great at not only treating his teammates with great positivity, but most importantly, and we told this to our athletes, it's what you say to yourself that's the most important. If you're telling yourself you're great, or you're telling yourself you're a bum, you're probably right.
So true. And I will tell you that one day on the pool deck in 2007, we were at Stanford, and I was coaching the camp there, and the junior pan packs were there. And you had called a junior national team meeting, and you said exactly that. You were talking about self-image. And one thing I know about you throughout your entire career is that you talk to your athletes about self-image. Who do they see themselves being? Talk about how you've incorporated that into your program and how you incorporate that into practices every day.
Well, you know, I think it's good to have meetings and have athletes talk about it among themselves. I also think that you have to have a culture in practice where if somebody starts to get negative, somebody else in a positive way will call them out on it. In other words, it's just not acceptable. You know, it's very unacceptable to be negative on somebody else. But I try to call them out on it if they're negative to themselves. You know, one thing that I try to work on when I give out some intervals, and sometimes we give out some pretty challenging intervals or pretty challenging goals to swim on easy intervals, and somebody says, well, I don't think I can do that. And I said, excuse me, did you just say I think I'll try that and see what I can do? You know, you kind of have to correct their brain. And we've gotten to the point now where all I have to say is, what did you say? And they'll correct it themselves. They get it, but still you have to internalize it. You know, you can't be questioning yourself. And I always try to point out in practice when people try something that's new. You know, I always look at my goal as a coach to get people to do things that they either don't want to do or don't think that they can do. And whenever somebody tries something that maybe they didn't think they could do and makes it or makes half of it, I think it's really a positive thing on part of a coach to point them out, you know, give them a shout out in front of the team and have that be everybody's goal to try to do something that they've never done before in practice. You know, it's so easy. And I know you see the same thing. When you go through a season, you can make a list as a coach of 4 people who will have the best meets because you've seen it every day in practice. And it just doesn't change. You know, if you train the same way that you trained last year, your results are going to be the same. You have to train faster, better, improve your technique, improve the little things in order to get faster. And as soon as they realize that and it motivates them, then the rest is really kind of easy.
I love it. One of the important things that I took away there was you rephrased the way that your athlete was thinking about the challenge of the set. So instead of saying, I don't think I can do this, did I hear you say, I think you can try to accomplish this? So that rephrasing is so critical, especially this day and age. Those of us who know swimming and know Mission Viejo and know you, a lot of your success is predicated on creating an environment where there is real challenges every day, whether it's volume, whether it's the intensity of the set. Talk about how you motivate your athletes with work and how they adapt to that from the mental standpoint. How are they progressing mentally and emotionally after they encounter these challenges in practice?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I always tell my team, particularly at the beginning of an Olympic year, a pretty amazing story about a young man that won the Olympic championship in the 200 backstroke in 1996. His name was Brad Bridgewater. And I coached him at USC. And at the beginning of the year, he came up to me and said, Coach, I'm going to win everything in practice. And he won everything from the warm up to the warm down and everything in between. And a lot of times he would get in and swim with the 200 freestylers and he'd swim backstroke and he'd win those races. I mean, And, I would say before that, he was a tremendous talent, not super focused, excited about swimming sometimes and not excited about swimming other times. But when he finally could see himself winning an Olympic gold medal, he made that goal in September and he kept it the whole year. So I try to tell him that story, and it's pretty interesting sometimes to see who tries to win the warm up. And I know that's not really the best way to prepare yourself for a practice physically, but mentally maybe it is.
Sure, and it shows you that that story holds water and is meaningful for the athletes. And I like how you share that. It kind of sets a certain level of excellence. And when we talk about setting levels of excellence as coaches, you were very fortunate at Mission Viejo as a very young coach to have some athletes who bought into the program. You're not going to have a Brian Goodell, a Casey Converse, or Shirley Babashoff every year. So how do you refocus and keep your program driving in that direction, even when you might not have those world-class athletes?
I think you need to keep in mind that if you have one athlete that's willing to be there and willing to work hard, it's worth it. A lot of coaches get discouraged that if their group isn't as good as they visualize it being. But my first year at Mission Viejo, this was before the 50-meter pool was built, and I took over a team that was at best a recreational team. A lot of times when we started morning workouts during the school year. Before that, they'd never had school year morning workouts, only during the summer. The only one or two athletes that would show up would be Brian and a guy named Taylor Howe. Sometimes nobody would show up, and I'd sit there for 30 minutes and leave and think to myself, it's going to turn around. And sure enough, Brian started coming every morning and Taylor started coming every morning. And then they started doing well in swimming meets. And then everybody wondered why. And then they figured it out. And it was just kind of a big mushroom, but it didn't start off real great, and it just took faith in the fact that it was going to happen. And if you got one really good swimmer, give them the attention, give them everything they need, and get everybody else to kind of follow that, give them the attention, give them what they need. And the group can become pretty intense and pretty profitable.
I can imagine. And especially when, Brian had this meteoric rise within 2 or 3 years. So how do you help navigate that athlete through that explosive success? There's a lot of things that they're going through from a maturation standpoint, both physically and emotionally. So how, as a coach, did you help guide him in the right direction through some of those challenges?
Well, when I started Mission VO, Brian was a eighth grader, and he was playing football that fall, and I was scared to death because of course he was good at whatever he did, that he would just stay out for football. And I talked to his dad about it one day, and his dad said, "Don't worry, Mark, he'll make the right choice." Well, he was a top 10 13, 14-year-old 100 backstroker, and I was afraid that I might have ruined him. However, he did win NC2As in the 400 IM 3 years in a row. And his senior year, he did swim on the UCLA medley relay backstroke. So I guess he kept some of that skill, but obviously became a great freestyler. But I think the thing that I remember, the one incident that I remember about Brian that kind of turned everything around for him, we were taking our first group to Santa Clara. And, we had some really good female swimmers and one or two good male swimmers who were also distance swimmers. And we were getting on the bus to go to the airport to fly to Santa Clara. And Brian was standing there at the gate watching them leave because he didn't have the qualifying times. And he said to me, "This will never happen to me again." And of course it never did. But, he still remembers that story when he got left because he didn't have the qualifying times.
So, Coach Mark, learning all of these things at a young age as a coach, what types of mental training things are you giving the kids at Mission Viejo today? How are you bringing mental training to your practices?
Well, goal setting, everybody says, is the most important thing, and it probably is. You need to sit them down. You need to get them to write down their goals, short-term goals, long-term goals, dream goals, and don't ever tell anybody they can't, because I am the first one to say that you may be wrong. Make sure that they set stepping stone goals so that they know what it's going to take to get there. Not just what it's going to take as far as swimming progression, but what it's going to take in practice progression. So I try to get them to set goals, not only times and competitions, but what they want to do in practice. How long is it going to take you to be able to do 3100s on a minute short course? When are we going to do that? When are we going to try 10? When are we going to try 20? And, when they accomplish those things, it becomes a lot easier to see themselves doing these other great things that they've set for themselves. And then the visualization part, I think probably the best example of a guy that visualizes well is Michael Phelps. And he used to put all his goal cards up on his ceiling so that he could pick one every night and visualize it. And he would not only visualize the time, he would visualize the splits, he would visualize the number of strokes. And I think it obviously paid off in the Olympics in Beijing, because I think he was within 0.2 of a second on all of his final swims except for one. And that was the 200 fly where his goggles filled up. But really, that visualization probably paid off more in that race than any other, because he swam the race on stroke count. One, took his goggles, threw them across the pool deck, pissed off his mom because she said, didn't we teach him never to throw his goggles? But even though he didn't reach his time goal of breaking the world record, he won the race because he knew exactly how many strokes he needed to take and where the walls would be.
So important for athletes at every age to be able to visualize and see themselves inside of a race. Coach, what's it like adjusting your approach for coaching athletes, whether they're college age, the whole new realm of pro swimming, or age groupers? And right now, you're focused primarily on age groupers and senior swimming. Where do you change your approach to talking to them about how they visualize, taking time to be present in the moment, writing affirmations? What are some of the differences there?
Well, I learned a lesson a long time ago. I think it was in 1992 when I had my first head Olympic coaching appointment. I wrote every living Olympic head coach and asked them for advice. I only got one return, and that was from George Haynes. And his advice was so simple yet so effective. He said, assume they know nothing. So in other words, you keep repeating all the things you want to see them do. You keep talking about how many underwater kicks. You keep talking about the basics of a turn. You keep talking about what you want them to focus on the start. Because as soon as you assume they know it, that's when you get in trouble. And here we are working with the best of the best, and we're still teaching them the basics, and they still appreciate it. And I use that in college too. Just don't assume they know anything. Keep teaching the basics. Keep things positive. Keep talking about goals. Just assume they know nothing and keep teaching them.
What are the things, coach, that you tell an athlete immediately following a poor or challenging performance?
Well, probably the first question I ask them is, hopefully it's not what was that, although I probably use that one on occasion. But it's more like, what did you learn? You know, uh, how did this happen? What happened? What were you thinking about? How can we turn it around? What are you going to do next time? And just try to turn a negative experience into a positive experience by talking about, if they made a mistake, what are you going to do next time? It's all about, I probably most people, this movie's too old, but if you ever get a chance to go on Netflix and see a movie that's called Gumball Rally, it's the race from New York City to Long Beach, and motorcycles, sports cars, all-wheel drive vehicles, and you can get there any way you want to. Obviously everybody's breaking the speed limit and getting chased by the law. It's a comedy, but at the beginning, when two Italians come out of the place where the race is going to start, the driver looks at the guy seated next to him. He breaks the rear view mirror off the car, throws it over his shoulder, looks at the guy and says, "What's behind you is not important." So I tell this story to my athletes and I say, make sure you live in the windshield, not the rear view mirror. Because so many people are so afraid that they're going to make the same mistake over again, or something bad is going to happen, instead of looking forward to something good. Expect something good.
And having athletes who are at that level of achievement, and even athletes who are maybe just qualifying for JOs for the first time, managing expectations, whether it's coaches' expectations, parent expectations, that can be a lot for young athletes to handle. So talk to me how you tell your athletes how to manage some of those expectations that maybe a lot of them put on themselves.
Well, I think everybody's a little bit different. And that's really kind of the challenging part of coaching. And that's getting to know each of your athlete as an individual and make sure you spend time with them. Try to show up 15 minutes early and pick out somebody, talk to them for 15 minutes, find out how their life is, how's school going, what are they thinking about, how did they think that practices went last week, how was practice this morning, what are they looking forward to tonight? Developing a relationship. I think that motivation between the coach and the athlete is all about the relationship that you develop. There's a little bit of fear. There's nothing wrong with that. Not too much. A lot of respect. And then, you have to, as a coach, you have to walk the walk. It's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to produce. You got to be there when they need you. I always, I've always had big teams, and, it's not been unusual to have 2 or 3 or more finalists at a big competition. And it's interesting to me to watch other coaches in that situation. Who do they run over to first? Do they run over to the winner or the guy that got fourth? The winner doesn't need you. The guy that got fourth needs you. And if you kind of think like that and help people along, it's going to bring them along a lot quicker. And it's going to really help your relationship with them and the trust that the team will have in you.
So what are you looking for, coach, with your assistants on how they approach their athletes? How are you mentoring your assistant coaches in developing those key critical relationships to have an ideal situation for coaches and athletes?
Well, I think, an assistant and a lead are two very different things. It's like the good cop, bad cop. The assistant needs to be the good guy. He needs to be the guy that the swimmers don't hesitate to go to. Sometimes I think swimmers might be a little hesitate to go to me because they're afraid that I might be disappointed in them. But what they don't know is I expect them to go to the assistant. The assistant will tell me, and then I'll circle back around and talk to them about it. So it all comes out well in the end. But I don't think an assistant can play the hard guy role. It's just too hard. You got to have a little bit of both. But then I think as you're mentoring assistants, you need to put them in situations where they're the lead. And of course, when like this past weekend when I'm out of town and at an open water competition and the assistant's taking the workout, then they're the lead. And it's a much different situation. And they have to be able to stand up to that, command respect, show knowledge, and, basically get the most out of the athletes.
When you see many of these young coaches today, and they're dealing with a lot different socio-economic environment than maybe you were going through in the 70s, and there's a lot of different distractions that this generation is dealing with. How have you adapted your coaching style to continue to remain open to these athletes with all these new distractions that they have?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't treat them any different. I think good athletes and motivated swimmers seek good direction. And it was the same way in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. I think if you give them good leadership, they seek that. They want to be led. Obviously, there are some new things that are a little bit different, but other than dealing with COVID, it really hasn't seemed to be that much different to me. Now, COVID is a whole new deal. And I think that's kind of what shows our resiliency. I think that shows as a coach how we can be creative and keeping athletes motivated, having them visualize the future, whatever the competition is. The biggest mistake that you can make is really not giving them leadership as far as what to shoot for, even though it may or may not happen this year, but giving them faith that it's going to happen eventually. Colleges are still going to want swimmers. They're still going to give out scholarships. We have to find ways to impress college coaches. And even if it's in small inter-squad meets or sending them results from practice, communicate with them and impress them. That's how we try to motivate the kids, even though they're not swimming in very many competitions. But I don't really see that much difference. I mean, the internet is different. Playing games on the internet is different. But kids that want to work hard and succeed will work hard and succeed if you ask them to. The only things sometimes that I get disappointed in is coaches that really don't try to challenge their kids. And I'm not talking about distance swimming versus sprinting. I mean, it's different training, but it's still the same basic thing. You're still asking people to swim faster than they've ever swum before, so it'll show up at a competition.
I think creating that aspect of fun inside the challenge too. Here's something that this famous athlete did in the past. We're going to do it. We're going to do it a little bit harder and see if we can come out on top. Right. I mean, that for me, that's what make practice fun. And as coaches, I think we have to be very aware of where we are every day. We want to meet the athletes in their space, but what are some things that you do to keep yourself inspired and motivated and open to having great high energy and enthusiastic practices?
Well, I really just visualize smiles at the end of a good race. And, that makes me get up in the morning and put my feet on the ground with a smile on my face, because I know that it's going to happen sooner or later. And that's really why I coach, to see the joy on the athlete's face after all this work when they accomplish things that they want to accomplish. And, we had some swims at this meet in Arizona, and I'll tell you a little bit about the meet. We were swimming in lane 1, lane 2 was open. We were swimming in lane 3, lane 4 was open. We were swimming in lane 5. Lane 6 was a buffer lane. Lane 7 and 8 were warm up and warm down lanes. So it was a very different swim meet. Not something that you would say is extremely motivational, but since we hadn't swum in a meet since February, these guys were killing it. And we had one girl. It's at altitude, so there's altitude adjustment. The girl went 9:03, and with the altitude adjustment, um, it was 8:58. And I mean to tell you, she had the smile on her face. It was just, I mean, I can still see it. It still gets me up in the morning with a smile on my face. That's what does it for me.
Absolutely. And how has Mission Viejo kind of pivoted to say, look, we still have the same goals. Our goals are the same. Has your training been affected at all by it? Are you doing anything different? Do we have the same length of practices? What does that look like?
Well, we started off with 2.5 hour practices. But of course, coming back after 6 weeks off was kind of a new experience for everybody. I really kind of was guessing on how to treat them, and I decided I wasn't going to baby them. So we did singles for 2 weeks. We did 4,000 to 5,000, and then on the third week we started going doubles, and we started going 6,000. It wasn't a killer 6,000, but we did get up to the volume pretty quickly, and they were just loving being back. We usually now can go 3 in a lane, and most of our workouts are short course because we have 600 swimmers in only one pool. Our other 2 long course pools aren't open yet because they're school pools. But we go from 4:15 in the morning until 9 o'clock at night, and my group is able to go 2 2 hour practices. We go 10 practices a week, and I mean, we're doing pretty well. I'm happy with it. I'll be a little happier when we can get in these other facilities and get some more long course training. Right now, only the post grads and the kids that don't have class can swim from 7 to 9 in the morning, and those practices are long course. And other than that, only our Saturday morning practice is long course. So that's a little bit of a compromise, but there's a lot of people that have won gold medals in a short course pool, so it doesn't have to be a compromise unless you think it is.
I agree. And our philosophy, and people will know this, is very similar in that the way that we train. And I do want to touch on, your training philosophy and, still going 10 workouts a week. We do something very similar. But talk to me why it's important to you that your athletes still have the ability as scholastic age swimmers to get up at 4:15, go to practice, and why is work such an important part of your program?
Well, I think without a doubt, the team that I'm coaching now is the smartest team I've ever been involved with. I went around the group the other day. Coach Montrella, Jim Montrella, comes in and works with us a couple times a week. And I went around and asked every swimmer what their GPA was, and not one was below 4.0. Not one. Now, a lot of that is goal setting. They want to go to an Ivy League. They want to go to Stanford. They want to go to USC. They want to go to Berkeley. Um, you know, College swimming and a good academic college experience is important to them. And of course, this comes from the parents too. The parents are helping them set those goals. But those goals are as important to them as any swimming goals that they have. And it's something I have to respect. And every once in a while, I have to let them out of a practice or I have to let them out early, but they make it pay off. And it's not something that I have to worry about. Hey, this guy's trying to, pull my leg or something like that. I mean, these guys are as serious about their academics as they are about their schoolwork. Right now we've got somebody at Brown, we got somebody at Harvard, we got somebody at Columbia, we got somebody at Northwestern, USC, and we're very proud of that. And that's kind of part of the culture too.
So I'm just asking this because I love this stuff and I could swim nerd it all day with you, but you're going up when you get up to peak volume this year. How much does that week look like? What's the total volume in that week?
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, we don't train everybody as a miler. With my high school kids, I have the philosophy that I want to train them as a 400 IMer. I think it's my responsibility to send kids to college with as good an ability to swim all four strokes. Some of them may be limited physiologically, but with as good an ability to swim all four strokes as possible so that they can be a well rounded college swimmer. Same with weights and dry land. We want them to go to college not as a freshman, but as a sophomore. So the college coaches really have something to work with and don't have to take a year to get it done. But I think that, we probably in peak volume average with the stroke swimmers 6 to 7, and with the distance swimmers 7 to 8, and in peak volume 8. If I go 9, which we always used to go as an afterthought in the old days, they squeak a little bit, but I'll just tell them some stories and they'll feel better that they don't have to do those kind of things anymore.
Oh, Coach, I really appreciate your time today. This has been so great, and I really hope that it impacts our younger coaches. One thing I wanted to ask you is a couple quick fire questions, and I've been posing these to my guests the whole season, and that is, does the women's gold medalist in Tokyo in the 800 freestyle break 8 minutes?
Definitely a possibility. If you ask me, is the ability there? There is no doubt that she has the ability.
All right, that was veiled. We know who we're talking about, but I'm with you. I think it goes down. The other thing is it going to take a sub 21 second performance in the men's 50 free to take home the gold medal?
That's a great question. The 50 free is always an exciting event because you never know what you're going to get. I mean, Anthony Irvin, who would have thought it? So I think it's a possibility. My personal opinion is the sub 8 minutes is more of a likelihood.
Sure. And Coach, before we go, who are some of the people that really changed the way you thought about your philosophical approach to the sport? Who's added some coaching gems to the way that you've coached your athletes over the years in terms of mental training? Where did you learn things from?
Well, I didn't start off as an age group swimmer. I started off as a high school swimmer, and I still have a lot of affinity for high school swimming. And my high school coach, Dick Wells, really made swimming fun and made me passionate about it. And I give him all the credit for the enthusiasm I have in the sport. My idols were number one, George Haynes, Don Gambrell, Doc Councilman, and I have a lot of idols with coaches that are younger than I. Guys like Bob Bowman. I like people that are intense about what they're doing, that are students of the sport, that realize that it's more than just swimming up and down, and that it's the relationship with the athletes. I remember going to George Haynes's retirement dinner with the Santa Clara Swimmers. And the thing that struck me was all of these women got up and said, "No, I was George's favorite." And what that tells you was he made everybody think they were his favorite. What a great coach.
What a great thing what a great legacy to leave. If every athlete you ever coach thinks that, boy, I think you've made a real impact.
Yeah,
Mark,
without a doubt.
How can people get in touch with you to learn more or ask questions?
My I have an old school email address, so you know I'm old school. It's Schubert Swim, and it's SCHUBERT swim at AOL.com. And if anybody ever wants to come out and watch practice, as long as you wear masks, you're more than welcome.
That's fantastic, Coach. I will tell you that at that junior Pan Packs, I followed you around the pool deck for about an hour, just trying to catch some notes.
I do remember you, but I didn't know you did that.
Yeah. Well, Coach, thanks so much. Everybody who's watching will be able to get a recording of this on the Fitter and Faster website, as well as on our YouTube channel. Coach Schubert, thanks so much for your time. I look forward to talking with you more this year.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.